In this episode, we sit down with Andrew Garbarino, who's an attorney, and he specializes in white-collar defense, cybersecurity, what happens after an event, and we're going to explore the legal ramifications of cyber attacks. We're going to dive into the critical decisions companies and individuals face after a breach. And we're going to do something really cool. We're going to uncover the intersection between law, technology, and ethics. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of One Step Beyond Cyber. We're in season 3, and I'm Scott Kreisberg. I'm the CEO and founder of One Step Secure IT. Today, I'll be joined by attorney Andrew Garbarino, who's going to help us understand the litigation side of a breach. Basically, what happens after a business experiences a cybersecurity breach from a legal point of view. So, Andrew, thanks for joining us today. For those who might not be familiar with your work, could you give us a quick overview of what you do and what led you to focus on the cybersecurity law side of things?
Well, first, thanks for having me on, Scott. I
Yeah,
appreciate
absolutely.
And I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you. So, just to sort of go backwards, my firm got into cybersecurity because it was inevitable. We're a full service law firm. We've got a lot of company clients, a lot of individual clients, but cybersecurity is a ubiquitous concern these days from a legal standpoint. We thankfully, the leadership at the firm sort of recognized this about 10 years ago. We were one of the first firms to really get into cybersecurity, and at least on Long Island, where my office is based, and it's a necessary component of any real practice of law these days.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, so let's jump into it. So we've seen, you can't turn on the news or look through your chat feeds today and not hear about data breaches, right? And so and we're hearing about ransoms and all these cyber threats. From your perspective, though, what are some of the biggest risks companies need to be aware of today?
So it's hard to define because it's changing a lot. You've got risk anywhere from foreign nation hacking, whether it's China, North Korea, Russia, where they develop, part of their national R&D department is hacking into our institutions, whether it's companies, whether it's federal agencies. That's something that different nations undertake to develop technology, develop weapons, things of that nature, and that's something that's it should be on the company level, especially in the technology space. That's a manufacturing space. That's something that should be top of mind. But it could be anywhere from just a bad guy trying to execute some sort of a money grab. It could be a bored teenager just trying to see what they can do and be as chaotic as possible. It could be a terrorist organization seeking funding. And to me, the most dangerous is the inside threat. Somebody inside a company, inside a business who's trying to whether it's hurt somebody because of some sort of human interaction or trying to steal money. Those tend to be the hardest to police.
Oh man. Yeah, so we work so hard as business owners to continuously educate our staff on these threats, and we've deployed training tools, AI type tools to keep everybody fresh. But that last one probably scares me. I don't know if it's the most, but scares me that there could be an internal threat that could actually just be activated by a dispute. That goes, and they want to get even. I'm just curious, is there a lot of that one, or is that one pretty low? And the state actors are the ones that mostly impact us.
So it as always, it depends. It depends on the company. In terms of the interpersonal breaching, it's not something that I see a lot of now. I saw some of that when I was a prosecutor, believe it or not.
Okay.
Who just wanted to sabotage their company. But that listen, all of the above are a concern. My point on the insider is that it tends to be the hardest to find because you've got somebody who's got some degree of authorized access. So it doesn't necessarily set off the alarm bells until it's a little too late. To your point earlier, though, it's big news when a big company gets hit with any sort of a breach or suffers a breach. I make the analogy about the weather. Pick any big news story where local TV ratings are sort of high. The weather, if there's a big storm coming, the weather usually really increases news ratings. Cybersecurity breaches are like the weather because they cut across so many people. So many people are interested in it. They panic over whether their data has been compromised. So it's a great concern to people, especially those who don't understand the ramifications of having their information compromised. And it's something that a lot of people take notice of: politicians, regulators, and once a company has suffered a breach, it's usually nothing but a headache after that for quite some time.
Absolutely. And what I've learned over the years, there's really nothing you can do to mitigate it at a 100% level, right? I mean, we could eat right, we can do all the things right, and we still can get sick, right? So, and so what we try to send the message is just like, do what you can and protect yourself as best you can, But since we're on breaches and we're talking about them, let's say a company realizes they've been hit by a cyber attack, So from this legal point of view, right, which you have a lot of experience, what are some of the first things that a company should do?
So the most important thing is to not ignore it, and that's important. And sort of a lot hand in hand with that is don't hide it. It's something that has to be addressed. Failing to address it properly is only going to make things worse. So having a plan in place. So this is before the breach. Having a chain of command set. People in authority understanding what phone calls they need to make as quickly as possible. That's important. And getting an attorney involved right away is important because it hopefully will maintain privilege between the client and the attorney and some consultants that might be brought in. That could be important depending on the circumstances. And also trying to account for insurance for a cyber breach. Cybersecurity and insurance, it's a difficult dance right now. The insurance industry is in a little bit of crisis when it comes to cybersecurity breaches. 10 years ago, a lot of insurers were just writing policy after policy for cybersecurity. Nobody really predicted where it was going to go. And it's impacted the bottom line at a lot of insurers. So there's, that results in a revamping of the consideration of policies on the insurance carrier standpoint. So understanding the coverage you may have, understanding what the coverage may prohibit. If you've got a team of attorneys that you want involved in the event that you suffer a cyber breach, you may need to pre-authorize that with your insurance company. Same thing with technology companies. Technology companies, the insurance company may want you to use somebody that they've already vetted. And if you don't account for that when the policy is being signed, you may be prevented from bringing the team that you want in, and that can cause headaches also. We've seen situations where ill-equipped attorneys, and this isn't so much a concern now as it was a few years ago, but where ill-equipped attorneys, because the breach was considered a part of something else, some other coverage, really weren't prepared on the cybersecurity regulations that were at play. And that's something that warrants a little bit of consideration also. So it can be worth your time to review your existing policy, or if you're getting new insurance, to account for those things in advance. And then, getting back to I think the point of your question, there's a whole host of legal obligations that can, it's sort of like a domino.
Okay.
Every state has their own cybersecurity regulation. And just to give you an idea, we have rarely at this firm had a breach that didn't cover all 50 states. And different states, there's different timing involved. There are different remediative measures involved. There are different ways to, there are different requirements on how to deal with employees or customers whose data may have been breached. And that's difficult to navigate. So where my office, we've got somebody who stays on top of that. That's part of what this attorney does is stay on top of it, because these things can change on an almost daily basis. New York just changed their breach notification rules. These things can change all the time, and staying on top of it is essential when you're coming to terms with a cyber breach.
That was wow. That little segment there is probably worth the price of admission, because we talked to a lot of people with regards to cyber liability insurance, and those that have it, a lot of times they're just looking to check off the box, so to speak, on what the policy requirements are, what the insurance company requires, and they're not taking it serious enough. And the last time I checked, and I mean no disrespect to insurance companies, but they are out to make a profit. And so if they can find a way to, legally not pay a claim because you didn't follow their instructions, not any underhandedness, they're not going to pay it. And so, and the other part that you brought up with regards to getting pre-approval for a legal team or even a technical team, I actually had not heard that before. That's a great recommendation for getting pre-approval on that. Let me ask you one question though. If you had to choose a lineal sequence after an event, do you call insurance company or your attorney first?
Well, follow the chain of command. Hopefully you've involved an attorney in trying to develop what your policy is going to be. Mm-hmm. When somebody is notified of a data breach, and that someone can be anyone, by the way. It could be a receptionist who gets a ransom message flashing on her computer screen. It could be the management of a particular business that gets that first notice of a breach. So knowing what to do is essential, and then it sort of depends. And look, we always recommend getting the attorney involved as quickly as possible. Again, for a variety of reasons. It gives a little bit of insulation to the company that's been breached. They can say, we immediately called our lawyer and we started working on this. But calling the insurance company is not necessarily a bad idea. If you can have your attorney on with you when you're on with the insurance company, that's something that might be helpful also. And just think of it as, it's almost like getting a devastating medical diagnosis. We have clients, they just start seeing dollar signs, and everybody understands that this is going to be an expensive ordeal. There's a lot of panic. It's very difficult to pay attention to what's happening during conversations. So having that other person there, and again, your lawyer who is legally obligated to do right by you, and having that person involved in these conversations is really, really helpful, because they can sort of explain what happened to you after the fact, even though you've been taking part in the conversation. It's kind of like bringing a loved one to a really rough doctor's appointment. They can maybe explain exactly what happened while you're sitting there in shock at what's going on.
Yeah, and I think it comes from that. The point of view of each individual, right? So an insurance company is there to represent your interest, but they're also having to represent the company's interest. Whereas, like you said, an attorney or a doctor or a fiduciary, financial advisor has to think of you first. So I think what you said there about having both on at the same time is really important, because it is an expensive event, but it could be more expensive if you go down the wrong trail, so to speak, or the wrong strategy, whereas an attorney might, chime in when you're talking and say, well, I'm going to confer with my client first, whatever it is that they need to do
whatever it is.
Yeah. Anyway, good points there. So now, I'm curious, right? Because we're talking about the insurance company, we're talking about legal advice. What about when a breach happens? You've got your tech involved. Let's say you have an internal tech, or even in an outsourced company like we are involved, right? To let's say we're being called in to validate or verify or see what we see. When do you see the collaboration per se start to happen between legal and tech, the technical folks, so that they're not doing anything wrong, like turning something off may not be the best approach?
So, and well, the short answer is it's immediate, right?
Okay.
It's all hands on deck right away. Just unpacking what you were asking, it's really hard to manage something internally at a company like this. My firm has a very large and very capable IT group. The head of which has a master's in cybersecurity. They're really good at what they do. If, heaven forbid, we were hit with some sort of a cyber incident, we would probably need to bring other people in because they're already busy. Okay, so your internal people, your normal managed IT team, they're probably busy with just the day-to-day things that are attendant to the operation of the business, right? You don't hire people if you're not going to use them. So, if you've got a big IT department, presumably they're all already busy. That doesn't mean that they're not going to jump in at the outset. And hopefully they've been trained so they understand what they're supposed to be doing. Are they supposed to unplug certain workstations to insulate them? Are they supposed to leave everything connected so they can try to figure what's going on? Those are things that should be talked about before any sort of incident takes place. And that's critical. But as things progress, your attorney should, and this is something else that can be discussed in advance. Your attorney should be hiring somebody from the outside to assist on this from a technical standpoint, and it's for a variety of reasons. One is what I just said. Your group is probably busy already, and adding this to their work functions is just going to be overwhelming, and it's going to effectively run the business into the ground because
Right.
they're not going to be able to manage everything. Two, your attorney can bring these outside consultants in, hopefully under their attorney-client privilege if it's possible, to the extent possible. The law is a little bit shaky on that right now. So that we can develop an understanding, we, the attorney, the client, and these technical folks, about what happened, about what needs to be fixed, and how to go about that. And also this outside company, or it could be multiple outside vendors, come in, and one of them will actually do the remediative work, which is significant. You don't necessarily need to just hire new towers for workstations. You may have to buy a few and just to get some people started, but you can refurbish what's existing. That's time consuming, and that's also something that's not often possible for your own IT folks. So getting them involved right away is really critical, and trying to figure out the forensic aspect. What happened here. Not every company is equipped to do that to the extent that's required for a variety of notifications. Like I said, each state has their industry specific notifications that have to be made if you're dealing with healthcare or things like that. So there's a lot there, and you need to have qualified people doing it.
Absolutely. Yeah. All really good points. I mean, we're like one of our mottos is trust but verify. I mean, it's an old saying, but and so that's why we recommend, even if you have a great internal team, to hire a third party to do risk analysis, to do pen testing, to do these types of things, so that there are no politics and feelings that could be hurt, things like that. Just somebody that's impartial, that only has one interest, which is really hardening a company's technology environment. That's so they don't have to play by any specific rules other than that. So great advice, man. So let's say again, we're going post breach now. Breach has happened, and it's look, it's not just about cleaning up the mess, which is a lot of work and expensive, but what legal risks come into play for the affected company, and how can they be sort of prepared for such a thing, and any regulatory fines that could come into play?
So there's a lot. The regulatory aspect is something that will have to be dealt with. You're going to need to report the breach to every state that you need to report the breach to, and that can come with fines. We've been pretty good lately. I kind of want to knock on wood at limiting the damage when it comes to fines to a single jurisdiction. So if you've got a New York company You've got almost all of the customers, the affected folks that are within a particular state, in this case, New York. Maybe we can limit it to just the New York Attorney General who's going to be leveling a fine if that's possible. It's not always possible, and those fines can get expensive. The average cost of a data breach these days, I don't have the numbers for the last couple of years, just haven't been released yet, but I think as of 2022, the average cost was about $5 million, and that's average. So that includes very big companies where it's more expensive, and certainly there are a few others, but that covers the legal costs. You need to hire a lawyer to help you with these regulations. One of the reasons is filling something out that's not truthful and accurate. That can lead to a criminal investigation. Even if it's not intentional. There has to be some care taken in terms of responding to the regulatory aspects to this. And if it's a large enough breach, the company is going to be sued. We had a breach a few years ago. In addition to the regulatory component, which resulted in significant fines, there were multiple class action lawsuits. So the data that was compromised for this one client included employee data. It was a healthcare organization. It included patient data. So there were two separate class action suits that were filed against this particular client, and that's in addition to all of the other things. So that doesn't take into account the remediative measures and the cost there, but the legal costs can be significant, and they're unfortunately necessary. It's one of the unique aspects of cybersecurity enforcement is that the victim of a criminal act, in this case the company that was breached, often bears the cost of the criminal act, which is a little bit unusual. It happens in environmental cases, but it's hard to find a lot of situations like that where the victim of a crime is going to be held accountable for what happened. And so that indignity aside, there's a lot that has to be done, and it has to be done with care.
Absolutely. I'm just curious, for a crime, I guess this is criminal we're speaking about, but the question going through my head that's not very well formulated is, for a victim to be due financial remuneration of any type, does there need to be proof of damage to the victim? In other words, let's say your personal information, such as your name, address, social security number, mobile phone number, whatever it is, right? The standard accoutrement of personal information has been exposed by a breach, right? But let's say it's already out on the dark web. I mean, let's say that data is already there 10 times already. And so ultimately, this thing didn't necessarily cause you any new harm. Does that come into play in any of this, or doesn't matter?
Well, that's something that we fight about in the class action suits, right? What the actual damage is. I have a friend that I lecture with on the subject every once in a while, and one of the things she likes to do is, she'll ask for a show of hands. How many of you are worried that your social security number is on the dark web? Raise your hand, and everybody raises their hand, and and it's very effective. She'll say it's already on the dark web.
Right.
It's really not worth anything. It's worth about, I can't even remember what the latest figure for a social security number is right now, but it's a pittance. People think that their information is worth a great deal. It's often not. To your point, though, it is jurisdiction dependent, when we talk about actual damages, but your point is a good one. Just because they were breached doesn't mean that the information that was breached has damaged anyone. Even in the context of a ransomware, and I know we're going to get to this, but we can call this foreshadowing.
Sure.
Even in the context of a ransomware, there's obviously been a breach, or there's a presumed breach. Somebody has taken your data. They're threatening to release it. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's been actual damage to people. It doesn't mean that it's not actionable, unfortunately, though.
Okay, good. I mean, at some point, I think, like you said, I mean, all that stuff's already out there, our social security number, our address. I mean, it's all there. And so if it's based on jurisdiction, then so be it. But you just brought up ransom, and it's a very profitable business. And you hear about companies that sometimes or whatever pay the ransom. How does the law, is this also going to be dependent on state or federal? But how does the law view when a company chooses to pay a ransom? And are there risks associated with paying hackers, like violating regulatory compliances?
So this is mostly a federal standard. It's important. And look, ransomware is a whole separate issue when you talk about cybersecurity. Ransomware is really, I don't think it's ever going away. Ransomware is really the big business here. And it's something that can be used effectively no matter what the company is. You've got a company, they've got employees, they've got customers. There are all sorts of public relation concerns, and whether to pay a ransom or not has evolved over the last decade or so. The FBI, it used to be don't pay the ransom, and then it was, well, if you really need the data to survive, then maybe you pay the ransom. And we're sort of at a stage where it depends right now, and you need to run things through the Office of Foreign Asset Control. So determining who it is that's demanding the ransom, and running it through the Office of Foreign Asset Control to ensure that you're not paying a terrorist organization or some unauthorized foreign national. That's necessary, and not doing that, paying the ransom and running afoul of those regulations, that can lead to greater liability for the person or the company paying the ransom. So it's critically important to do that, and that's the major thing that we advise when it comes to ransomware.
Interesting. So if it is a terrorist organization, and you
may not pay the ransom. You may not pay the ransom.
Right. So if it is, and you're not able to pay that ransom, and you really need that data back, you are not going to be in a good position.
No, you're going to be in a very problematic position. Yes.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, I did not know about that piece. So
there's usually a separate consultant that you bring in for ransomware. Also, there's a ransom negotiator. It's a relatively short list of companies that I'm familiar with. I'm sure that there are a lot more out there, but you usually bring somebody in who, believe it or not, institutionally knows who most of the major ransomers are. But that's a consultant that you would want to bring in separate and apart from another just a different sort of data breach.
That's a crazy thing. I never knew that position existed. Sort of a hostage negotiation specialty, but for cyber ransom. Of course there is. Yeah.
Of course.
So we've talked a lot about what happens after, the fact, and possibly not even being able to pay to get your data back. What can companies do to protect themselves legally before an attack? Are there any protective measures that can be done, let's say, to reduce their legal exposure?
So you need to do your best. As a company, you need to do your best. Like you said it earlier, Scott. There's no way to be ironclad and sure that you're not going to be breached. There's just no way to do that.
No.
So having the right policies in place, having updated policies in place, being compliant with applicable law and regulation. If you're in the healthcare field, you need to be compliant with HIPAA. If you're in New York State, you need to be compliant with the SHIELD Act. If you've got customers in New York State, you've got to be compliant with the SHIELD Act. Being compliant that way is essential. If you're going to have a written plan, which you should have, you also need to follow the plan. And this is something that I've been saying for 20 years, not 10 years. If you're not going to follow your compliance manuals or your policy manuals, it's better to just not have them, because it's going to be used as an exhibit against you in the event that something goes wrong. So doing those things, having the right vendors, vetting your vendors, making sure that your vendors haven't been breached. Some of the most problematic breaches that I've seen were the result of a company's vendors being breached. We had a client who, while dealing with the New York Attorney General's office, had a vendor suffer a data incident that impacted our client's data, and it just made things so much worse. So just being aware of who you're doing business with, making sure that they're compliant to the extent that you can. Those are all really important things.
Agreed wholeheartedly. Yeah, doing tabletop exercises, like you said, making sure that everybody knows their role. I can tell you, the first time you'll do a tabletop exercise with a client, I mean, it is deer in the headlights look. And by the time we do our third one, it's pretty like grooved in, and they know what to do. And then, the only thing I would add to that, and it's just because it's a technology thing, not a legal thing, and I didn't ask you about technology. This is where that backup comes into play, where if you can't pay a ransom, and if you're going to really lose that much data, you need to have really good controls over your data backup.
So it's funny you say that, because, the backup isn't as ironclad as it used to be.
No.
And don't underestimate how, these cyber bad actors have they reinvest in their own infrastructure. These are businesses, and they're especially wealthy because they get large dollars, and these folks aren't paying taxes either, and they're getting better equipment. They're talking with each other. They're planning better. And there have been instances, I haven't personally dealt with it, but I've heard anecdotally about, bad actors being in the backups for more than a year. You've got the bad guys in your systems laying dormant for a year or more, waiting to spring. And you'll have companies, and I know you guys aren't one of them, but you'll have companies come in and just say, listen, we're just going to back up. We're going to back up every night. We're going to follow all the backup protocols. You get breached, we're just going to spin up your backup, and you're going to be fine. That's not necessarily the case anymore.
Nope.
So it's really important to not only back up, but also do the things that you were mentioning, the pen testing, just running programs to ferret out any intrusions. Those are all things that need to happen. And again, there's the HR element also, making sure that you don't have folks that are just going to click on every link. So the phishing tests that we all hate, all of those things. There's somebody that I know who is incapable of not clicking on a link. It could be in big flashing letters, "Don't click this. This is malware." He would click it. It just you got to have that sort of training in place also.
And you got to be willing in HR to do what you need to do. So they're exposing your company to potential, bet your business, propositions. So it's not worth it. Mm-hmm. So, Andrew, we tend to deal with small and medium-sized businesses, $80 million and below. And look, these big resources, these big companies, they have, Fortune 500 companies probably have very large budgets to handle this. And that's why sometimes, you hear about like a breach with a large entity, and it looks like they got hit hard, with $100 million fine or whatever it is, a class action lawsuit, which isn't even a rounding error to them, right? So, but from a legal point of view, are there any suggestions for us, smaller, more agile type entities that you can provide suggestions for?
So those companies are actually bigger targets these days.
The smaller guy.
The smaller guy. I have a good friend who owns a technology company, and I'm going to steal this line from him. There's a reason that people don't rob Fort Knox. Fort Knox has lots of gold in it. It'd be great if you could pull it off, but nobody does it because they've got these giant steel doors, and there's a military presence there. So instead, these guys are going to break into 1,000 different houses that don't have that kind of security. and it's a really powerful analogy. It's hard to take down a really big company because they do pay for the latest software, and they've probably got multiple software. I call it a software cocktail, multiple softwares that are running to protect their systems. They've got the latest hardware. They've probably got security, maybe even armed security at their cloud host. It's harder to breach these companies. It's a lot easier to breach hundreds or thousands of smaller companies,
Right.
and it's something that can be done in volume. You don't have to spend one night like you would just breaking into somebody's house. You can, breaking into one business from a cyber standpoint. You can try to break into thousands with the click of a button. You send an email that has a malicious link in it, and you send it out to 1,000 different people, and you see what happens. And and you see that with seniors. My mother's laptop. She's received that malware message pop up. A dozen times at this point.
Yeah.
Thankfully, she's not calling to pay somebody at Microsoft $600. But think of the volume that they do. They do that to 10,000 people. If a third of them pay that $600 to Microsoft, and taking out the banking information that the bad actors are going to get aside, that translates into a lot of money. So it's big business, and the smaller and medium-sized companies are becoming bigger and bigger targets these days, which is kind of sobering.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, all good points. And look, you've probably seen cases where a company's legal preparation really did help, minimize the fallout. Can you share a story or two on let's say what good legal prep looks like, and what the different, how that made a huge difference in after the breach, results?
So the biggest thing that it does is it avoids the what I call the why question from a regulator.
Right.
Why didn't this happen? Or why don't you have a policy for this? And that gets very uncomfortable because there's never a good answer to the why question. Why did you do this instead of that? So the preparation really makes the response a lot more streamlined. And again, in my experience, the government really just wants to see that you were doing your best. We've had really rough HIPAA breaches where the Office of Civil Rights, who sort of control what happens when there's a HIPAA breach. They'll step back, and they won't levy a fine because when determining fault, they'll acknowledge that this company did what it could to prevent what happened. It doesn't always work that way with state attorneys general, but it does make the response a lot easier. And you don't want to give anything to the other side, from a civil standpoint. So when there's a class action, it minimizes that list of shortcomings that's going to be in the complaint. Having evidence that you had the appropriate policies, that you followed protocol, all of those things. It just makes life a lot better once there's been some sort of a data breach. Again, bearing in mind that more than 10 years ago at this point, the director of the FBI famously said there are two types of companies: those that have been breached, those who are going to be breached. So it's seen as something, like I said at the beginning, that's somewhat inevitable.
It's so true. I've heard a slight modification of there's two kinds of companies. There's those that have been breached, and those that there's been those that have been breached and know about it, and those that have been breached and don't know about it. But
that could be the case also.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, man. This has been really interesting. So in sort of wrapping things up, if you had to give advice to companies worrying about cyber attacks, like, is there any one particular thing that always pops out of your mouth as standard recommendations?
The thing that I try to combat is, I've had clients literally say to us, who would want my data? Why would I be a target? You're a target. Like I said, it's become a volume business, and it can be very, very damaging. So if one piece of very quick legal advice, I don't do this work myself, but have an attorney look at your insurance policy. Have somebody competent look at your insurance policy, explain what kind of cyber coverage you have. That's worthwhile. It's probably a couple of hours of time for a good attorney. I say that acknowledging that there are insurance policies that may be this thick, and maybe it's not just a couple of hours, but it's good to understand the coverage that you have, and just try to think about what you would need to do if you suffered a breach of any kind. Those are all essential, sort of points of work that I can give. So I couldn't come up with this one, Scott. I'm sorry.
No, I didn't expect it, but I think that it's really good, and it causes me to think, which is, when you have a cyber policy and you're going, it sounds like a lot of money. Let's say, I have a $5 million policy. Smaller business, let's say a $10 million a year business. That's half my revenue. That's got to be enough, and it depends depends who you service. I mean, if you're servicing high risk clients, that may not even be a tenth of the price. So, so having an attorney review it, going, hey, this needs to change. Besides what you're covered with, it could be an amount.
Yeah.
So
it's critically important, and yes, it's you want to know what you could be sued for. So to your point, if you're somehow a financial clearinghouse, even though your revenue might be $10 million a year, your collective clientele's revenue might well exceed that, and that's something to be concerned with also.
Absolutely. Woo, Andrew, you've given us, just a ton to think about. You've certainly given me a ton, and I've been doing this for a while. I just want to thank you again for sharing your insights with us and our listeners, and really enjoyed spending some time with you this morning. So if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and we'll see you next time.